I'm speaking from the library of the Dutch church at Austin Friars, the city of London. And this church is a very special one. It is the first official Protestant church of the Netherlands. Well, I don't need to tell you that under Spanish Catholic rule, Protestant churches were not allowed. So Protestants had to seek their fortunes elsewhere. And the library of the church is interesting in many aspects, several which I cannot go into this time. And I also need to tell you, I'm talking about the book collection because Ad mentioned the archives, and the church has wonderful archives. Most of these are held at the London Metropolitan Archives, and they fall outside the boundaries of my project and of my talk for today. So I'm talking about the book collection. And the red thread through my talk is the idea of a cat with 9 lives, because during the research for this talk, I sort of found that the church and its library went through about 9 major events over time. And I thought, well, you know, cats and the internet, what could be better? So look out for that. Life for the church began in 1550, when a group of Flemish, but also French and Italian and some Dutch Protestants traveled to England from the Low Countries, because it had become too dangerous for them to stay there. England, however, was Protestant under Edward VI. So off they went in a boat and crossed the North Sea. And their leader was Johannes Alasko, who was originally from a Polish family and a former priest. He'd been in England before, sort of laying the ground possibly for a possible strangers' church in England. He was an excellent organizer and administrator, so the ideal leader. And King Edward VI granted the church a charter, a copy of which hangs in the hall of the Dutch church. He gave them part of the old church of the Augustin Friars, monks, so short for Augustine is Austin Friars, at this site. But soon after, the other Europeans split off and founded their own churches. So pretty soon it was mainly the Flemish and the Dutch that remained at Austin Friars. Now, the church's first major threat came from Mary Tudor, because she wanted to bring England back to Catholicism. So non-Catholic churches were closed, and part of the congregation got on another boat, crossed the North Sea, and came to Emden. That is on the utmost northwestern tip of Germany, right opposite Delfzijl, as you can see there. And life was a bit different from that in London, but they made the most of it by writing and printing books, some of which are still held in the library. Because the church had very little in the sense of texts to guide them, text to teach the congregation, text for ministers to prepare their sermons, etc., etc. So a lot of these they wrote themselves. We have a number of editions and translations of Alasko's sort of ordinance for the church. So they needed a book in a library. But I'm racing through this. Oh no, not now. Right, Mary Tudor died, Elizabeth I came to the throne, and they crossed the North Sea once again. So they obtained a new charter with fewer privileges, but they were allowed to return to Austin Friars, and that's where they still are. And their third life was long and rich with further developments in liturgy, doctrine, teachings that influenced Protestant communities in England and in the Low Countries. And it is during this third life that we hear about, for the first time, about a library. Because in 1605, and that's 3 years after Minister Simeon Ruiting, 3 years after the Bodleian Library was established, Simeon Ruiting set up a library to inform church members and to defend the church against detractors. And this is a quote from Michael Springer's article, his latest contribution to the history of the Dutch Church, which will be published in the spring of next year. The library became a real space in 1650, when Marie Dubois, a wealthy member of the community, made a large donation to build a library room in the church. Books could be borrowed for a month, with ministers having unlimited access to the library, but readers had to record the books that they took home in a register. Now, Lindeboom, in his History of the Dutch Church of 1950, observes how serious the church administrators took the library, because they appointed 3 governors, the minister and 2 members, or 2 elders, or others. And this was when the collection barely filled 2 bookcases. So the collection was small but cherished. And it grew mainly through donations by all sorts of people, former ministers, member of the congregation, merchants, but also ambassadors and diplomats. So that explains the wide range of topics of the collection, because how else can one explain the presence of 2 sets of Blauw atlases, for instance, or works of history and even works on economics? Professor Springer sees the great social and political role the Dutch Church played in London reflected in the collection. Well, needless to say, most books deal with theology. We have a few shelves full of Bibles, psalm books, etc., and commentaries by giants such as Martin Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, Erasmus, and Alasco. But there is also Grotius and Oboemius, Blaise Pascal. Now, all donations were recorded in the benefactor's book, now held at the London Metropolitan Archives. And the books themselves often have notes of who donated the books, and sometimes with a motto, as you can see here. These days, the books can't be borrowed anymore, but researchers are very welcome to visit the library and consult the collection upon request. A 4th life was triggered by a fire in 1862, just at the time when negotiations between the church and the Guildhall had been concluded to move the collections of books, letters, and archives to the Guildhall. Most of the books suffered only water damage and could be salvaged, and they were rebound and then moved to the Guildhall. And for the purpose of the transfer, a catalogue was composed and published in 1879, and that is available on Google Books. I think the time of the collection at the Guildhall can be seen as its 5th and possibly its 6th life, because gradually the books returned to the church. So we're making progress. So here we have the Guildhall to the left, and we have a title page of one of the Blauw atlases to the right. So the collection returned to the church for the purpose of another inventory project, because Johannes Hessels from Cambridge had been asked to make an inventory of the archives and to transcribe all the handwritten documents. And this he did in the final decade of the 19th century. And the result was 4 hefty tomes published between 1887 and 1897. The church holds 2 sets, and the British Library also has a set. And here they are, right behind me. So by the end of the 1930s, the whole collection was back at the church. And then the Second World War broke out. And in 1940, the building got a direct hit from a German landmine. It was completely destroyed. But the library showed its cat-like nature once again, because it had just been moved to a safe place only a few days before. But life number 7 was gone. Lambeth Palace Library had been less lucky. It also had been hit by bombing and parts of its library were destroyed. So after the war, when the Dutch church was rebuilt, parts of the collection were moved to Lambeth Palace Library to replenish its collection. And that is why the current collection held at the Dutch church is barely a fifth of what it used to be before, with other parts at the London Metropolitan Archives and at Lambeth Palace Library. And this brings me to the project of recataloguing the book collections. And I have to mention and thank the instigator of this project, the scholar Christopher Joby, because without him, it probably would never have started. Christopher is an expert on the art.
Hi.
Dit is Marja, ik zit op een andere computer.
All right, Maya. We got everything up to Christopher Joby, and then your screen froze.
Yes.
Could you start again from that point onwards?
Yes, it's just that I don't have the presentation on here. So I don't have any slides, but I can read you. I don't
Go on, yes.
But I can read the presentation further.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Okay, so Christopher Joby then suggested a new catalogue for the library of the Dutch Church. And I was immediately interested because I had done a similar project years and years and years ago before, and I'd love to do it. But I've only been in post as curator for Dutch language collections for barely 2 years. So I had, I didn't have an idea about the library of the Dutch Church. I didn't really know about it. Nevertheless, I submitted a proposal saying we will be done in 6 months. We started work in 2013 and we're still at it. It's far too interesting to stop. So if you're listening, Chris, a big thank you. But I couldn't do this project on my own, of course. I mean, I do it together with a group of people. There is Diana Mercer, formerly at UCL Library, Susanne Lapp, a wonderful, enthusiastic researcher, Marja Smolenaars from the short title Catalogue Netherlands, and students from the University of Oklahoma, USA. Yes, you heard that right, Oklahoma. How did that come about? Well, in the summer of 2016, the church held a conference about Alaska. And it so happened that Michael Springer was there. And he got chatting to Diana Mercer about our project, and she mentioned the fact we could do with a bit of help. Well, that proved to be just a ticket for Michael, because every year he and colleagues come over to Europe with a group of students to do a hands-on project. So we wasted no time, and in May 2017, Professor Springer and his students came to London to work on it, to work on the project. And the goal of the project is to bring the catalogue up to date and to have it in electronic format so that it can be shared online. And the goal of Professor Springer's project is to identify the books that were transferred from the Dutch Church to Lambeth Palace Library, because although they are on their catalogue, it is not easy to identify that the copies are indeed from the Dutch Church. And then hopefully we can bring them together at least in the shape of a catalogue. That's the idea. And I also need to thank Charles Mandelbrot, who was librarian at Lambeth Palace Library, for his hospitality and help. And Michael Springer estimates that about 1,200 books, 1,500 books were transferred to Lambeth Palace, of which around 200 have been identified. So we have still some way to go, but we need to remember that they only come over for about 2 weeks. So there is not that much time every year to spend on it. But we're chipping away. And in 2018 and 2019, the group returned. Unfortunately, COVID prevented them from coming back in 2020 and 2021. And this year doesn't look good either. but we hope that one year they can resume the work. So while the students and of Professor Springer work at the Lambeth Palace Library, Diana, Susanna and I work at the church. There are about 400 titles, half of which are published in the Northern Netherlands. And these titles were ingested into the short title catalogue Netherlands by Marja Smolenaars. So at least these titles are available online. And there is a special code by which you can find them. You can look for London or GB London, and it will say Dutch Church in the records. And the other 200 titles are from England, Venice, Basel, Frankfurt, and other places. So we've been cataloging the books on a spreadsheet, assessing their condition and also trying to establish their provenance. But that turns out to be far too time consuming, although it is highly interesting, of course. But to my great relief, I discovered that Johannes Hessels also grossly underestimated the time it would take him to complete the project. So, you know, it often happens. It's just as well we can't look into the future. So I very much appreciate the patience of the Dutch Church Council, the ministers, I've seen 3 of them come and go, and of course the staff, Saskia and Rein and George. I'm sitting at Rein's computer at the moment, so you know, they are fantastic, honestly. And I can assure them that the spreadsheet is 99% ready to send. So you all are my witness. It will really, it's not so much that the project is completed, because as I said, this can go on for years yet, but at least some sort of catalogue will hopefully soon be available. And yes, the church and the library may be in their 9th life, but they have a bright future ahead of them. Thank you very much. And sorry for my laptop giving up.
Not at all. Thanks very much. And the reason it has a bright future is partly thanks to you. So it was wonderful to hear about the library of the Dutch Church, which I knew absolutely nothing about.